Alright, so I just opened the game, we are in the main menu. If I hit play, we get into the tutorial scene. And after a little animation, if I follow the instructions, I go to the next part of the tutorial. I follow the instructions again. There's also a nice spider hook that goes up and down. And finally, avoid the obstacles, collect the booty, got it. And we get to our actual game. If we were to close the game and play it again, we are in the main menu, but this time, if we hit play, we get to the main game immediately, because we've already beaten the tutorial once. Hi, I'm Ricky. Today we're on the 34th episode of the Endless Tunnel series, and today we see how to make a tutorial for our game. We'll do this by using a component and also an essential feature of Unity that we haven't seen before, animations. Make sure to subscribe to the channel for more videos and follow me on Twitter if you want some updates on whatever I'm working. Right now I'm developing a new PC game, all links in the description. Alright, so let's start by making a very quick bug fix, something I forgot to code in our previous episode. If you remember, in the main menu we added some weather events, and we have a manager, and we have a thunderstorm script. Here we have activate thunderstorm, and we also added an unlock achievement feature to this script. But we don't want to unlock the achievement when we touch this component in the main menu. The reason is that we don't have an achievements manager in the main menu, and we don't want to unlock an achievement when we call it in the main menu. We had a similar thing for the fog script, and we fixed that. Now let's also fix this. It's very simple, let's just make a null check. Very quick and easy. I'm also gonna add a comment. Alright, now I'm gonna close this, and we can get on with the actual episode for today. So how do we make a tutorial? Well, in my case, a tutorial is just gonna be a scene, so let's start by making this new scene. And the new scene is gonna be actually very similar with the main menu. So I'm actually gonna go in the scenes folder and duplicate the main menu. And I've renamed it tutorial. And that's gonna be our fourth scene as the element, well actually the fifth, counting the 0. And let's open the build settings immediately, and let's add in the tutorial. And just like the index suggests, we're gonna add it to the end. Now in this tutorial scene, we definitely don't need those signs in the canvas. We also don't need the thunderstorm and the night effect. And we don't need the fog. And no, we don't need those boat animations. In the camera, there's nothing. In the manager, we don't need anything of this sort. Alright, that's more like it. Now let's bring in the player. So let's go in our level scene. Let's copy the boat and just paste it in. And for the player, we're gonna keep the sprite, the rigid body, the box collider. Well, actually, box collider we are not gonna need, so I'm gonna remove it. All these other scripts I'm gonna remove. The boat moving script, for now let's keep it, but we're gonna remove it later. You'll see why later on. Let's start with the tutorial scene with an animation. So let's do this. Let's select our boat player. And to start animating, we have to add a component called animator. Next, we need to make an animator controller. So in our project, right-click, create animator controller. And I'm gonna call it tutorial boat. Now we select our player and bring in the animator controller. So the animator is a component that we need to add to a specific game object in order to animate it, while the animator controller is something we can put on a lot of different animators at once, and the animator controller is a parent for different animations. So we have animator, animator controller, animations. And of course, one animator controller can handle as many animations as you want. So now to make a new animation, let's select our boat player, and let's open the animation window. If you don't have it, just go here, add tab, animation. It's gonna ask to create an animation clip, and always make sure that you have the player selected and that you need to have an animator or component activated. Let's go with create. And for this animation, I'm gonna make the boat move up and down, kind of floating in the air. So I'm gonna call it tutorial float. Tutorial boat float, more precise. And hold on, let me actually go out animation real quick. And by default, let me put the boat right here. Let's make it real big. Alright, this is good. Alright, let's go back to our animation. Okay, so we have our player selected. These are the default position. Now to animate something, we need to tell the animator component which properties to animate. And the properties that we can animate are all the serialized properties that you see in the inspector here. So we can change the values in our transform. We can change the values all over the sprite render. We can also disable or enable sprite render. We can do everything. In our case, we're just going to move the position up and down. So we go here, add property, transform, position. And by the way, do you see that we can also change the properties on boat movement? That's because the properties in boat movement are serialized, and so we can change them through animation. But of course we don't want that right now, let's just go for position. As you can see, right here we have a timeline, and by making a new property, we are added automatically 2 keyframes. The keyframes are the part of an animation where things happen, where a certain values are set. And this is just like any timeline that you find in any kind of animation program. You have a start and finish, we put the keyframes here and there to set the values, and then all the values are going to interpolate between all the keyframes. So I'm going to go at the middle of the animation, so 0:30, I'm going to make a new keyframe, just pressing this button. And now to change the values of this keyframe, I'm just going to go on top of it, you can see that it's blue. I'm going to hit record, and now we are in record mode, and everything we do is going to be set onto the timeline. And I'm just going to set the Y a bit higher, and you can see that it also gives us preview, and then we close the record mode. And now we can go left and right in our timeline, and we see that it works. It's changing gradually between those keyframes. Of course, that's a bit simplistic, so let's actually move those keyframes to make the animation a bit better. We can just select the keyframes and move them here, and now our top position is here. I can also copy and paste keyframes. So I'm going to put this here, and here I'm going to invert the Y. So at the start is 0.96. Here we have 3.8. So let's just start from 1. Let's not make things difficult for ourselves. So we start from 1. Then the top position is going to be, let's do 3.5. Sure. And then on a negative, it's going to be minus 2.5. So minus 0.5, no, 1.5, yeah, big math. And then we go back to 1. All right, let's see. Perfect. Well, it's not perfect, but it works. Now do notice that the values that we have here are blue instead of their normal white. That's because these values are being controlled by the animator right now. If we exit the animation and we go back, you see that now they are not blue anymore. It tells us we're not modifying it. And you can see that we have the default values back here again. We can also just do this, we can move it all the way up here, and the animator, as soon as it takes control again, it's going to modify it so to make the animation as is on the timeline. So the animator has complete control over the transform position right now. So one good thing to do is take the first keyframe of this animation, so 0, 1, 0, and just copy it to the default position of the boat. So let's remove preview and let's paste it. All right. You can see that when we touch the timeline, preview gets turned on immediately. Now, if we hit play, it's actually already working. Here you can see it goes up and down, but there are 2 things that are bad. One, it's too fast, and second, it doesn't loop seamlessly. And we don't really care about making it loop. We'll see how to do that later. For now, let's just finish our animation. In my case, I want it to go up, down, and then it ends. So I'm just going to do this and copy it, removing the first. Here we go. So it's middle, up, down, middle, up, down. And then I want it to end here. So I can remove this. And this is going to be the final frame of our animation. And when it ends, I also wanted to scale it down because right now it's too big. And I want to start scaling it down when it's about in the middle, so right here. So let's do add property, transform, scale, and now we got a new keyframe at the end. Let's also add a keyframe right here where we want to start changing the scale. Let's go to the end, select the scale keyframe, record, and scale it down. And that's good. The only thing is that now it's a bit too on the top. So let's also change the Y position to be more like this. Let's see how it looks. I think it's fine. Let's see. A bit too fast maybe, but it's okay. We can change the speed artificially without changing the timeline. And to do that, we use the animator tab, which is different from the animation. Let's go to Window, Animation, animator. And I already have it here. Inside we have animation states. We don't really need to know a lot about it right now, but basically it's a state machine. A machine that checks whatever state it's currently in and does something based on that state. There are condition states, so like entry and any state, and then there are the actual animations. And by default we have an entry state, which it transitions to the first animation that you make. That's why when we hit play, it was already animating. I'm not going to go into full detail on how the animator tree works, it's really complicated. For now, just know that we have our animations here, and we can select them to change their values. In this case, here we have speed, so I'm going to set it to 0.5, and that's good. I'm also going to double click on it, and we have even more values, like for example loop time, which we want to disable. We don't want it to loop, so let's hit play. Much better. Alright, so that's the first animation of our tutorial. I want to add some text at the top and bottom that says the game's name and the credits, so who made the game. So I'm going to canvas and make those texts real quick. Alright, so that's it. Just some TextMesh Pro stuff. Now let's select both the title and the credit text. And because I don't want them to just be disabled when we start the actual tutorial, I want to fade them out. We could do this by script, but it's a lot quicker to do through animations. So let's select both, and let's add an animator component. And in this case, we don't need to make two different animator controllers and two different animations. We want to apply the same exact animation with the same exact way, so also with the same exact animator controller, to both those texts. So in our project, let's make one animator controller, and let's apply it to both. Perfect. Now we just select one of either, animation, and let's create a new animation clip. In this case, as a property, we select the TextMesh Pro, and we select color. Then we go at the end of the animation, hit record, and put the alpha to 0. Exit record mode, and let's see how it looks. Very simple, very nice. Then let's go into animator, and here's the animator for our tutorial text. We select the animation text fade out, and we remove loop time. Let's hit play, and here we go, it works. The only thing though, they are not synchronized, the text and the boat I mean. So let's close this. And to synchronize animations, there are a lot of different ways. There are a lot of complicated ways, but in this case we just need to synchronize two animations, so we can just do it manually. So our boat player has an animation that ends at 145 at half the speed, yeah. So we can just select the animation of our text and put it so that it ends at 145. Then we also select the animation and put the same speed, and let's see how it looks. So now they're synchronized, although I will make it a bit faster for the text. So I'm actually gonna move the keyframes for the color to be like around here. This should be better. Yep, you can see that it's very simple to just modify when an animation starts or where it ends. The cool thing about this timeline is that you don't have to put a keyframe at the start of animation, it can just be empty, so that's great. Anyway, let's move forward. What we want to do next is give the player the ability to actually move left or right when this starting animation has ended. So let's go in our manager and let's make a new tutorial manager script. In here, let's make a function to start the tutorial. And in here, we'll give the player a mobility and we'll show some text telling it what to do. But first, we need to know when to actually call this function. We want to call it when the animation ends. And again, there are multiple ways to handle animation. We could use animation events, which are special keyframes which call certain functions, which are great if you're dealing with a lot of events. In our case, we just need to know when the animation ends. So let's just use an invoke method with a delay that we choose on our own. So we just call the function on awake, and for the delay we make a new float value. For now I'm just gonna debug log a dummy message. Let's hit play. It was a bit too early, so I'm gonna pump it up to 3.75, and that should be good. So when that timer ends, I want to show a text telling the player the first part of the tutorial. In our case, it's going to tell it how to move to the right. So let's go back to our scene, canvas, and let's make a new text. And while we are here, let's also duplicate it and do it for the left. Then let's disable them by default. In your manager, let's make a reference to those two game objects. Let's turn the right text on when we start the tutorial. So now the player is told to go right, but he can't actually go right now. If you remember, in our boat player, we have this boat movement script I told you to remember about. That's one we use in our level normally, but we are gonna need some extra functionality on it. So instead of modifying the original, let's just make a copy. Let's also open the boat movement, and we can just select and copy everything, paste it in here, and now change the values that we need to change. So for example, the name of the class, the singleton, and we don't need the wind or whirlwind in the tutorial. Fixed update we can keep as is, except for the wind and whirlwind part. Clamp position we want to keep. Start script we don't need. Set wind, set whirlwind we don't need. Head start end we also don't need. Also right at the top we can delete the interface, and we're good. This script simply moves left and right and clamps the position, which is what we want to start off. If you remember, we have this can move bool value that is false by default, and without it we can't move. So let's make a new function to change that. In here though, we also need to disable the animator, because right now our animator controller is controlling the transform's position. And because we want to change the transform's position through code, we have to disable the animator. We don't need to cache the value since we're only doing it once. Alright, and let's also go in the tutorial manager. And when we start the tutorial, we call the boat tutorial movement singleton and change the can move to true. Let's go to Unity, and now let's bring the values in here and let's bring them down. So we have the same values that we have in our normal level. And let's remove the boat movement. Then let's go in our manager and let's bring in the references to the text. Let's hit play. Can't move right now. After the animation ends and the text appears, I can move. And you can see that the boat player, if I turn on the animator again, I can't move. Alright? For the next part, let's detect when the player has to reach the rightmost side of the screen, and let's flip the texts. So let's go back to Visual Studio, and we already have a way to detect when the player has reached a certain part of the screen. We have this function called clamp position within screen that clamps the position of the transform positions X, and it does that through X margin, which is the maximum margin of the screen where we can go. So let's copy this value real quick, and before we clamp our position, let's check whether we have touched the end. So if it's measured the margin, we've gone to the rightmost. If it's less than the negative of the margin, we've gone to the leftmost. Then let's go in our tutorial manager and let's make two new functions that says when the boat has reached a certain part. And to call them, we also need to add a singleton to our tutorial manager. Alright, back to the tutorial movement, we can call those functions. Then inside those functions, well, on the right one, we just flip the text, as I've said. While on the left one, for now, let's just disable the boat. But of course, we don't want to call these functions all the time, and we also don't want to call the left function before we have done the right. So let's add some Boolean values. Then we just check those Boolean values and we turn them to true the first time that we get this function. For the reach left part though, we also want to add whether the player has already reached the right part. Alright, let's go back to Unity. Let's see how it looks. I can't move during the animation. When it ends, I can go wherever I want. If I go left, nothing happens. But if I go right, the text changes. And if I go right again, nothing happens. If I go left, the boat disappears. Alright? And instead of just disabling the boat, let's also remove the text that is on the left. And let's make a new one showing a new tip. In my case, I want to say avoid the obstacles, collect the booty, and also show an image of a rock and the image of a chest treasure. So in our canvas, I'm going to make a new empty game object. And inside, I'm going to make those things that I just said. Alright, and let's also add a button. And this button is going to be the one that brings us to the main game. So it's the end tutorial button. Finally, let's disable by default this final tip parent. Let's go in our manager and let's make a reference to it. Then let's take it and let's turn it on when we reach the left part of the screen. And let's also disable the left text. Then let's make a new public function to call with a button. And here we want you to do two things. We want to go to the next scene, we want to go to the main game, but we also want to save the fact that the player has beaten the tutorial. So we're going to use PlayerPrefs. And let's make a new const string for our pref. And notice that I mark it as public. That's because we're going to call it in another script. We set the value to 1 to say that we have beaten the tutorial, and then we change the scene. In our case, the level of our game is actually in the scene before, so I pass in -1. Alright, let's go back to Unity. Let's take the button and bring in the manager, tutorial manager, and tutorial. And let's also bring in the reference for the final tip parent game object and hit play. And here's our final tip parent. And if we press on the button, here we go to the actual game. Now we just need a way to actually get into the tutorial. Right now we are getting in manually, but we also need a way to actually go from the game. And we're going to do that in the main menu. Let's go to Scene. In here, when we press this sign here, this is a button. When we press this, we go to the next scene, so we go to the level. Instead, we want to check whether the player has beaten the tutorial before, and if not, go to the tutorial. So let's go in the manager, and let's make a new class. I've called it main menu manager. In here, let's make a public void function for the button. And just like I said, let's check for the PlayerPrefs that we saved in the tutorial manager. So if the pref is 0, it means that we haven't seen the tutorial yet, so let's go to the tutorial. Alright, let's go to Unity, let's select the button and change the function. Instead of scene functions, we go to main menu manager and press play. And because we are not using scene functions anymore, we can remove it. Let's also clear PlayerPrefs and hit play. Alright, first time around we go to the tutorial. If I close and start again immediately, we still go to the tutorial because we haven't beaten it. And now we are at the main game. If I close and start again, because we have beaten it, we go directly to the main game. Perfect. Alright, so that's it for the basis of the tutorial. We can make it a bit better though. Let's go back to the tutorial scene. I want to add a pirate hook that tells the player which part of the screen to touch. So let's make a new 2D object. And for the sprite, I dragged in something from my game. Here it is. And now I'm gonna bring it in. And here's our hook. Let's also preset the position. And scale it down. And this looks like it's indicating a certain part of the screen. And I want to animate it to show that it's going a bit up and down to kind of give some movement and flair to the scene. But before we do that, let's make sure that it actually works. So let's go in our manager and let's add a reference to that hook. So by default, it's going to be disabled. We're going to turn it on when we start the tutorial. And we're going to flip its X when we change the text to. And we flip its position, so from right to left, when we activate the left text. And finally, we're going to disable it when we touch the left part of the screen. Back to Unity. Add the reference. And turn it off. Alright, so it works. It needs to be adjusted on the position, of course, but it works. Let's close this. Let's fix the positions. Alright, I think this is fine. Let's disable everything again. And one thing though, I want to animate the hook. I want it to go up and down. But right now we're also changing its position through code. We're flipping its X. And as you've seen before, you can handle position through code and through animation at the same time without problems. To go around this problem, there's a very simple solution. It's to use parents. So let's make a new empty game object. I'm gonna call it hook parent. I'm gonna set it as child of a hook and set the position to 0. So this way it is exactly on the same position of the hook. And now I'm gonna set the hook parent as the actual parent so that the hook has a reset position from the transform, but it's actually in the same position as before. It's a nice little trick. Now for the hook parent, oh, I forgot to pass in the rotation. So I took it here and passed it here. All right. And now we're gonna move the hook parent through code like this. And we're gonna animate the hook with the child, with the one with the actual sprite renderer. So in the hook child, let's add the animator component. Let's go to animation, select it. Let's make a new animation clip. We want to change the transform position, so let's add that property. We just want one keyframe here to go up and one to go down. Alright, let's see. Looks like it works. The only thing though, it's not looping seamlessly. And in this case, we want it to loop seamlessly. So to fix this, we select the first and final keyframes without all the others, right click, auto. And this is going to tell Unity that the first and final keyframes are to loop smoothly. So you select that, and then in our animator, we take the animation hook up and down. For the speed, I'm going to put it down to 0.6, and then if we double click it, in this case we do want it to loop, we don't want it to go up and down indefinitely, and we also want to check loop pose. And this is also going to increase the smooth transition of the loop animation. Finally, hook by default should be on, but hook parent should be off. Then in our manager, for the new reference of the hook, let's bring in the hook parent. And let's see how it looks. Alright, much better. And you can see that it goes left with no problem. And here we have our final text, avoid the obstacle, collect the treasure, got it. And we start the menu. One final thing though, that final text telling you what to do, it also has a button telling you to play. And one thing I've noticed with people testing my game is whenever they saw a button that said play, they would immediately press it without reading anything that was beside it, even if it was something important. So one thing we can do, let's select our button and let's disable it. Let's set the interactability to false. Then in our manager, let's add a reference to that button. And we need to import the Unity Engine UI library. Then let's take it and let's make a new function. And let's set the interactability to true. Finally, let's call this function with invoke to get a bit of a delay when we turn on the final tip parent game object. I think 1.5 seconds is fine. Let's save, then let's select our manager and bring in that tutorial and button reference. Alright, I'm also gonna clear PlayerPrefs and give it one final test, starting from the main menu. Alright, so I just opened the game, we are in the main menu. If I hit play, we get into the tutorial scene, and after a little animation, if I follow the instructions, I go to the next part of the tutorial, I follow the instructions again, there's also a nice sprite hook that goes up and down, and finally, avoid the obstacles, collect the booty, got it. And we get to our actual game. If we were to close the game and play it again, we are in the main menu, but this time, if we hit play, we get to the main game immediately, because we already beaten the tutorial once. Alright, so that's it for this video, hope you learned something new. If you have any doubts, tell me in the comments, or join my Discord channel, where we can chat in real time. There is a link in the description for a GitHub repository, where you can download the entire project for free, with no copyright problems, all the assets are in there. And finally, make sure to subscribe, like, share the video, ring the bell notification, follow me on Twitter and all that stuff, and yeah, see you next time.